Hey there, Yarn Life.
Hey, Yarn
Jess
Life.
and Selena here, coming at you live. I'm super excited about today's episode. I think I might learn a thing or two, so we're gonna find out.
Hopefully, that's the always the intention when I come here.
All right, so a little quick intro. Thank you guys so much for joining the Yarn Life show today for your daily dose of fiber. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for notifications on every episode we air. And please get tangled up in our fun, upbeat, educational Facebook group that's dedicated to the hanks, skeins, balls, and cake that we love most, and to the people that make the most of them, because yarn is life. So today's episode is sponsored in part by you guys. Please check out our Yarn Life swag store to pick up a token tee, tote, or mug today. I could say that 5 times fast. Every purchase you make there not only gives you great products you love, but it also helps us to create more great episodes and bring on more amazing guests. So you can find our shop link in the show notes section today, which I will upload after the show is over. So today's episode, we have 2 sponsors. Yay! Fancy schmancy.
Right.
We are also sponsored today by the American Crochet Association, and the ACA is your personal journey to crochet mastery. This one-of-a-kind community offers a 12-course program that's easily managed with 1 new lesson every week. They focus on crochet education that builds knowledge and skills, helping crocheters to help themselves. So today for episode 7, I can't believe we've already done 7 episodes. I think that's awesome.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Lucky number 7.
That's right.
We're talking with founder, host, and lead educator of the American Crochet Association, Salena Baca. Woo woo.
Woo-woo. That's me.
Salena compiles and produces every lesson at the ACA so that crocheters can build their knowledge and skills. She outlines these lessons with real life experience and practical advice that assures you have a great understanding of every topic. Salena has also been a part of the crochet industry for years and has learned some practices to better her yarn life. So today she's going to share her top 5 with us, and I'm super excited about this. So before we kind of dive into our top 5, give us some perspective on your background. So can you tell us some of the jobs that you've had in the crochet world and kind of what your career has looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. Thank you for asking, because, if we're so bold as to name this episode, top 5 experts to crochet like a pro, then if you're new to the Yarn Live show, which I hope we have a lot of new viewers here, you may wonder where this is coming from. So thank you. Yeah, I've crocheted my whole life. I learned in my hippie school when I was 5 years old, and I just never put it down. And in 2009, I started making this a career. I started making crochet a career. So I started just by making things to sell, and then teaching my friends and giving lessons. And then I started selling patterns, and then I started writing for magazines, and then writing for books. And then I started creating associations like Design Wars Challenged, and I helped Crochet Media Group start Happily Hooked Magazine and the Pattern Pack, and all of their endeavors. And so all the while, Salena Baca Crochet and Baca Creations has been producing hundreds of patterns, not only under my own name, but for yarn companies as well, like Red Heart. Shout out to Red Heart, shameless shout out. And my most recent endeavor, I have always loved crochet education. I've always loved education, has been in starting the American Crochet Association. We're about 1.5 years old now. Almost, actually, this October will be 2 years. And so that's kind of where my background is, and that's where so much of this information is coming from, especially these 5 expert tips today.
Nice. That's quite the career. And I love that you haven't just stuck to one thing, that you've had a chance to really experience so many different facets and corners of what the industry has to offer. So I think not only had to be fun for you, but it probably taught you a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. With every new endeavor, I learned something new in this industry. I learned a new way to either better my own crochet knowledge or skills. I learned how to function in this community, as a as a fellow crocheter, that's really important to me, is to, as I grow individually, I hope that, what I learn and what I contribute helps better the community as well.
That's awesome. All right, so let's dive right in. What are your 5 tips to crochet like an expert? I need to know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tip number 1, you have to crochet. No, I'm kidding. No, so I guess I'll just go through each one individually and we can chat about them. Let me know if you have any questions. If anybody's watching live, throw in any questions, comments, feedback you have, and me and Jess will kind of shout them out as you're here. So obviously there are lots of tips, there are lots of things that you can do, but just based on my own knowledge and experience, based on the things that I've done, these 5 things I keep going back to, and these 5 things I keep fine tuning, and I keep having to remind myself that they're important and they deserve time and effort and attention. So in no particular order, tip number 1 is know your yarn. And I'm saying that from experience. Because, for probably the first 20 years of my crochet life, I only had hand-me-down yarn. And I had no idea that there was any kind of difference. I had one crochet hook and hand-me-down yarn, and it was probably a variety of weights and types. I probably had fingering weight and lace weight and weight 4, and I probably had some bulky and all of this stuff, and all of it was just kind of used with the same hook. What I've realized in the crochet community is so many people just have a very basic understanding of yarn. Maybe they understand there are weight categories like weight 4. But for example, the reason this is so important, the reason this is really going to help you bring you to that kind of expert level as a crocheter is not just understanding that there are weight categories, but understanding that there are subcategories. For example, I live and breathe in the weight 4 category. That is my favorite. I love weight 4 yarn. I just know it and it understands me, so we get along really well. But there's so many subclasses in there. There's just so many within that. So not all weight 4 yarns, for example, are created equally. With that said, it's not just about the weight. It's also about the fibers. It's also about the textures. An alpaca yarn is not at all the same as an acrylic yarn or a wool yarn or a bamboo yarn. They're all completely different. They're all best suited for certain projects, and maybe they're not suited for other projects. So in knowing your yarn, it really encompasses everything about yarn, their weights, their types, their fibers, their textures. And even if you're like me and you only live in one weight category, if that's where you're comfortable, it's really a good idea to have a very broad knowledge of all of those different things, because it's only going to help you up your skills.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, because it seems like such a simple thing, but it's really not. I mean, I remember the first time I crocheted with cotton, and I was like, this is, and the only word for it is sticky.
Yeah.
Like, this is sticky, and you don't, and you don't really understand it until you actually work with it. And I don't think I really realized that there were different weights when I first started either, because everything I started with was worsted weight. It was weight 4. And I didn't really start exploring until, I got a little more comfortable with actually crocheting. And then, the whole world kind of opens up and you have so many different possibilities. When I started knitting socks, I'll never forget, being told, hey, make sure you use superwash. And I'm like, what the heck is superwash? And everybody was like, you got to use it if you want to actually wash your socks. And I was like, well, I want to do that. So, and you start learning more and more. But if you actually like seek out the education, as opposed to just kind of like making mistakes and figuring it out that way, or just kind of experimenting and figuring out that way, I think it's kind of cool to do a little exploring. And
it really is. It really is, especially because there's so many different variables, and there's too many variables in the yarn world for you to just kind of learn as you go. I mean, yeah, learn as you go is great, but I think for some things, sometimes, but it can't be your philosophy, especially as you're approaching yarn.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. All right, what's tip 2?
Tip number 2 of 5. I know everybody's going to groan. They're going to be like, oh, I know. But understand your gauge and your tension. So many people equate gauge to this foreign word on your crochet pattern that you can just kind of glaze over and keep going. But really, gauge and tension, gauge has a lot to do with your own personal tension. And so many people crochet much tighter or much more loose than the writer of the pattern. And now gauge and tension aren't going to matter for every single thing that you make. They're not. If you're making an amigurumi, it doesn't matter if it's a 1/2 inch larger or smaller. But if you are crocheting something like socks, that 1/4 inch is going to make all the difference. It could be like a size difference. It could be the difference between whether or not they're going to fall off your feet. And the same thing with clothing. Think about even if you're making something like an Afghan. If your tension is massive, then you might be making an Afghan that's only supposed to be 36 by 36, but yours is coming out 40 by 40 and it's using a ton of yarn. So understand gauge, understand tension, and try your best to mimic the yarn, going back to yarn, the yarn tension. Like if it gives you some kind of, use this hook with this yarn and your tension should be this. It should be so many stitches, your stitch math and your row math should add up to this. I would suggest trying to mimic that, and then you could probably closely mimic most patterns. You could follow most patterns with greater ease if you're going to do things like that. And again, gauge matters and tension matters, because if your gauge is out of control big or out of control way too small, there are ways you can alter your muscle memory to be a little bit more uniform so that you can have, a wider variety of patterns to follow.
That's really cool. I am one of those people that I just didn't understand gauge at all to begin with. I didn't really, it looked too much like math, which, yeah.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I mean, it's really simple math, but still, like, I remember the first time I looked at it, I'm like, what is that? Those are numbers. And they're like very specific. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just going to read the pattern. It's going to be what it is. Like, this is out of my control.
Yeah. And I started with a lot of amigurumi, so it didn't affect as much. So I just assumed that it wasn't really a big deal. And then when you start getting into more specific things like socks and, stuff that you actually want to turn out a certain size, and also being able to, I think one of the biggest things that's really cool about understanding gauge and tension is being able to accurately, or at least fairly accurately, predict how much yarn you're actually going to use. That's one of the things that kind of drives me a little nuts, because you don't want to go back, especially if you're using more special yarn, or if you're using a particular colorway, or if maybe they discontinued what you're using. Like you want to be able to predict what you're going to be able to make out of what you have, or how much you need to make what you want to make. So I think that's one of the most important things, and one of the most interesting things that I've found about actually paying attention to your gauge is being able to more accurately predict the amount of yarn that you actually use.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing that just dawned on me that happens sometimes to some people is, you want to make patterns because you first see the image of whatever it is that you want to make. Maybe it's a sweater or an Afghan or whatever it is. And the whole idea is that you want to make that thing that you see. You want it to look exactly like that. And the fact of the matter is, if your tension is really tight, then it's going to look like this tight, crumply thing. I've noticed that with Afghans sometimes. People make Afghans, or they make things that are supposed to be flat. And if your tension is really tight, it's going to crinkle. It's not going to lay flat and maybe be this perfect shape that you want it to be. And alternatively, if your gauge is really big and loose, you're going to lose a lot of that stitch definition. You're going to lose a lot of that because it's not matching what the sample was with the gauge that it was written with. So you want to be right there in the middle somewhere with your gauge and your tension.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a real biggie. So what's tip number 3?
All right, tip number 3 of 5, and this is super eye roll. Everybody rolls their eyes whenever I say this, and they're like, nope, not going to do it, but I promise you it makes all the difference in the world. And tip number 3 is you've got to swatch. You just got to. Do you have to swatch for absolutely everything? No. Now, if you're already practicing to up your gauge and your tension gauge, then swatching is going to be a little bit easier for you to approach. Now, I like to swatch for a lot of different reasons, and this is really one of my favorite tips in terms of upping your skills to crochet more like an expert, to really up your crochet game, so to speak. When you're swatching things, you're swatching for so many different reasons. You're swatching to first get an idea of what the patterns it is telling you to do, especially if it's kind of complex. If it's a complex stitch, if it's a complex type of design, maybe there's cables in there and you've never done cables before, these particular kinds of cables. So you want to swatch just to kind of get a feel for that. Maybe it's incorporating different kinds of color techniques that you've never used before. You want to swatch for that as well. Maybe you're substituting a yarn. Again, know your yarns. Maybe you want to substitute. Maybe you don't have this weight for yarn in this brand, so you want to see if this weight for yarn in this brand is a reasonable match. So you want to swatch to see if any kind of substitutions are going to fly for the design that you're making. But then also you want to swatch because you want to, for all of those reasons, and more, I could name a dozen more reasons you'd want to swatch, but for all of those reasons, it's going to help you practice. The more you practice, the more uniform your tension is going to be, the more uniform your gauge is going to be, the more you're going to just make these little kind of squares or little circles or little tiny things. You're going to practice all of these different tricks and techniques. They're going to help make your projects better. You don't want this beautiful sweater that you're making as a gift to be the time that you start practicing new color change techniques. Because what if you do something, what if you're making this sweater out of a silky bamboo yarn, and what if you determine halfway through, oh no, silky bamboo yarn does not really stick together when you tie the ends together, and I cut my ends too short when I did my color change and I shouldn't have done that, it's too late. But if you'd have made a swatch with this yarn for this project to determine all the different techniques you're going to use, and really kind of swatch out the different elements of that design and the different techniques, then you're going to have a better idea for how to tackle and complete whatever it is that you're making, just with more knowledge and confidence.
So it's a great way to kind of prepare you to maybe do something new or to work with a new yarn or a new pattern or something. And I love the idea of also using it as a way to kind of practice techniques and get comfortable with doing something maybe a little different, or just as an opportunity to try something new. I know when I first started learning like the magic loop and stuff like that, I had to do it like a million times before I actually like got the hang of it. And I like that idea of kind of using it as a way to both practice and your muscle memory will get better and everything kind of gets a little more consistent too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just the more you swatch, you'll get more comfortable with it, because some people think this is a waste of my crochet time. This is a waste of my resources. This is a waste of my time. Like, I just want to make the thing. That's what you want to put your time and attention towards. But if you've ever frogged something, or if you have a million whips just kind of laying around that you detest for some reason, if you would have swatched first, maybe you wouldn't have tackled half those projects, because so many times we approach projects and that's why we have so many whips, because we don't like some element of it. It's not exciting anymore. It's not fun. We don't like the yarn. We don't like the color. The texture is not doing, like, there's so many things that maybe you could have avoided this entire project if you'd have just swatched first. So it really makes all the difference.
I love that. I think I'll start swatching more. I don't really do it very often. I did start doing it more for designs.
Yes.
I used to just sketch and then just like see what happened. But I did start swatching a little.
Oh,
it's really not a good idea. But
you're a gambler.
I am. Living on the edge.
Well, and I mean, Jess, you and I could have a whole other conversation about designing too, and I hope we do in the future. But yeah. The more I design, especially for commission, I have to swatch. If I don't swatch, if somebody is sending me yarn for a project, for example, if they say, okay, Salena, we want you to make this blanket. It looks great. We love the idea. How much yarn do you need? If you don't make some kind of swatch, you have no idea how to estimate. No idea. So again, swatching is going to give you so many answers. It's going to give you experience, it's going to give you answers, and it's going to help you make better decisions as you tackle projects.
Awesome. I love it. I want to insert a quick note from Jessica. She has been very excited about the fact that we're talking about swatching. She said, a big lesson for me this year was planning and buying all of my yarn for the project at once after a swatch. She said it felt so weird the first time or two, but she loved not running out of yarn.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a perfect example of why it's important to at least know how to do it, even if you don't use it 100% of the time, because you won't have to 100% of the time. But having the ability and kind of knowing what to do with a swatch and how to figure out your gauge and all that stuff, like actually knowing what it is, I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, when I say there are a million reasons to swatch, I probably wouldn't fall short of a million reasons to swatch.
You should get on that list because I want to see if you can actually hit a million.
Okay, maybe 50. No. I don't math well. Difference. That's a little bit of a difference. I estimated a little high.
As being a little bit of a difference. All right, so are we ready for tip 4? I want to hear tip 4.
Tip number 4. Sorry, I had to sing that. I'm sorry. I'm a singer sometimes. Tip number 4, you guys may think it's hokey, but it's true. You should make what you love. You should make what you love, no matter if you're a hobbyist or if you're doing this professionally, for quite a few reasons. Now, I don't know about you guys, but even when I was crocheting as a hobby, now I do it professionally and it's still my hobby. But when you crochet, people find you, people like they gravitate towards you and they're like, oh, you crochet. I saw this mermaid tail blanket on Pinterest and you should totally make it. Or insert anything that people see in the world that's crochet that they want you to make. And again, it doesn't matter if this is your hobby or if you do this professionally. Sometimes it's just fun to expand your limits. Sometimes it's fun to try new things and have a reason to try it. Like, oh, if Jess is going to pay me to make this mermaid blanket, like I would have never made it myself, but it would be cool to try it out. Sometimes it's fun to try new things. But if you genuinely don't enjoy working with something, like for example, something I really detest is working with black yarn because it's impossible to see. It's not fun to work with for me. It doesn't matter how much lighting I have or even if I'm crocheting outside. So Jess, if you, for example, ask me to make you something in black yarn, I'm not going to enjoy that at all. And I'll do my best, but I won't enjoy it. So my tip is, just because you can crochet, just because you can make something, whether you're just doing it as a favor or whether you're doing it as a commission, no matter what, just really think about whether or not you're going to enjoy it, because this is crochet, again, whether it's your hobby or your business, it's enjoyable. You know, it's something that you do because you really love doing it. So don't bog yourself down and weigh yourself down by making things that you don't love, that you aren't going to enjoy making. So before you tackle any kind of project for friends or family or work, really kind of consider that.
I think this is a great tip because it's kind of a little unexpected, because you think people would you wouldn't have to be told to like make things that you love, but it is interesting how many times we as crafters get pulled off the path of things that we actually enjoy and into things that are not so enjoyable. You know, before I knit, I would have people asking me all the time to make things that they saw on Pinterest that totally weren't even crocheted and they were just knit. And I'm like, I can't do that because that's not crochet. And they don't understand. I also think one of the things that you have to try and get across to people that you care about that are asking for things is how time intensive it is to create one of these pieces. Even something small, you know, can take a day, 2 days, 3 days, you know. You have to protect your your enjoyable time. Like it's supposed to be a hobby for yourself. I actually have a really good friend of mine. She's a knitter, and she refuses to make anything for anybody. She doesn't make gifts. She doesn't take requests. She says it very politely. She's very nice about it, but she does not make anything for anyone besides herself. And we always make fun of her for it because she's very adamant about, you know, not doing, shout out to Kristen, you rock. Literally not doing anything for anyone else. But, you know, it's what she enjoys. It's why she enjoys the craft, and she's a spinner as well. And, you know, she puts so much time and effort into what she does. She's a big fan of lace projects. And I'm like, I don't know how you do that. Like, makes my brain hurt. But, you know, she loves every second of what she does because she made sure she picked it out. She picked the yarn, like, and that's, you know, that's the ultimate. And for some of us, we do enjoy giving away to others, and we enjoy taking requests and trying new things. And if that's what you enjoy, that's great. But just ask yourself that question before you embark on a project, and then you resent the person that asked you.
Or you resent your hobby. You know, it's if you're going to be doing things because you're excited that somebody asked you to make something, or somebody's going to pay you, or somebody's going to give you the yarn, don't let that fool you, or don't let that take away the fun of this. Because that brings me to my tip number 5, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, go for it.
It's a perfect segue, tip number 5, and that is practice makes perfect. And that goes hand in hand with almost everything else that I've said, and that this crochet is a muscle memory thing. Crochet is something that only gets better the more you do it. When you take a look at your first project and your 50th project, there's a huge difference. Excuse me, there's a huge difference. And so invest time into swatching, invest time into understanding gauge, invest time into understanding your yarn, because the more you put into all of those things, the less time you're going to spend on any one of these things, really, just the more you really broaden your experience on any of them. But back to make what you love, only because I really thought these kind of went hand in hand so nicely, is, you know, practice is going to make perfect. And if you really want to perfect the things that you love doing, then you can't multitask. You can't crochet 2 things at one time. Like, you can only crochet one thing at one time. You put it down, you do something else. We only have so much time to put towards this. You can't really crochet any faster. You can, but really within a very small degree. And what that means is you only have so much time to do this. So, you know, Jess, if you're going to ask me to make you a black beanie, I'm going to be like, that's not necessarily the practice time you're going to be looking for. You want to practice making the things that you love so you can really perfect them. You know, just because, or I want to say, becoming an expert in crochet, it could just be for your own self. It doesn't mean you have to make this a business or you have to do anything else with it. It could just be something that you want to perfect. And if you want to perfect this in a way that's very meaningful for yourself, then practice the things that you love making, because then that's only going to make you want to do this more. So there's like this satisfaction in that. It makes you want to keep going back.
That's awesome. I think I was just thinking about this morning, actually, because I'm putting together the ballet curriculum for the studio this year. And we expanded the program, so we have more girls. And I was thinking about how bored they get doing tendus and plies over and over and over again. And I try and, first of all, just make the combinations interesting so they don't get bored. But I also try to tie in why those things are important and why they're the building blocks of, you know, what comes later and what they work on when they move away from the bar. And I think it's kind of the same thing with crochet, you know? I mean, I started literally just chaining. Mm-hmm. And when you get really comfortable with that, when you've practiced and practiced and practiced, and then you can build on it. And it's the same thing. It's one of the reasons why I think crochet is so cool, because it is really just a handful of stitches that you just rearrange in these amazing combinations. Right. But the more you practice, the better you get, the more reliable your gauge and your tension will be. You know, the more easily you'll be able to swatch, the faster you'll be able to swatch, and all of those things kind of fall into place. So I think it's the perfect like conclusion tip, because it kind of encompasses, you know, what you can do with everything else and where you can really take it if you keep practicing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And these are things that I've learned over the years. I've learned a lot of these things the hard way, a lot of them the hard way. And they really do, they're so simplistic, but they really do make all the difference. You know, just a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of application with some repetition can really go a long way.
I love that. Keep it simple, stupid.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, I think we covered some really awesome stuff this episode. So thank you, Salena.
Thank you. Thank you. This is always fun for me to chat about. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. So what's next for us? Please join us on Facebook to vote for our next feature episode. So we have a poll available for votes, and new entries open every week. So find our Facebook group link in the show notes. I will upload as soon as we're done here. And then remember that today's episode is sponsored in part by you. So please check out our Yarn Life swag to pick up a token tea, tote, or mug today. Every purchase you make there helps us to create more great content, more episodes, and bring on even more amazing guests. Find our shop link in the show notes as well. And thank you guys so much for joining this episode of the Yarn Life Show for your daily dose of fiber. We'll see you guys next Friday at the same time.
That's
Bye,
right.
guys.
Peace, guys. Thank you. See you next time.